My wife and I have always lived a quiet life in the country with our son, Wesley. Our 9-acre property is surrounded to the north and the east by a forest, where Wesley would often go to play with his friends or by himself. For his 8th birthday, I had gone into the forest with Wesley to help him make his own tree fort, where he could stash his comic books, Game Boy, toys, and treasures that he would find while exploring the woods behind our house. He amassed quite the collection of interesting rocks and bugs, which he stored in mason jars, of course, in his forest base, and he spent most of his free time just a few hundred yards away from our house. It was a peaceful life that we had for ourselves. I would take our car into work on the weekdays, and bring my wife to town right after Wesley's bus arrived to take him to school. Each day was the same routine, and we all spent the weekends together at the house. In short, we were all very happy. This week is the 6th anniversary of my son, Wesley's, disappearance. To this day, we don't know what happened to him on that brisk autumn evening, but from the moment our 12-year-old son left the house, we had a sneaking suspicion that he was never coming back. On Friday, August 23rd, 2013, our daily morning ritual happened as it always had. I would wake up, eat breakfast with Kim and Wesley, and we would wait together until the bus arrived. Wesley had a half day at school that day, so he would return home before me or my wife were able to get home and watch him. This wasn't a big deal. He was 12 and could look after himself for a few hours. We told him to call my cell phone as soon as he got home after school that day, to make sure he was home safely. As Wesley climbed up the stairs onto the bus, my wife began to tremble and eventually break into tears. Neither of us knew what she was crying for, but we waved our son goodbye and both climbed into the car to finish off the work week. My cell phone rang at exactly 12:33 that afternoon. The default ringtone filled the air, and I saw that I was receiving a call from our home landline. It must have been Wesley, who had just gotten off the bus and ran into our home, obeying my instructions to call me. When I slid my finger across the screen and answered the phone, the only thing I heard was the empty dial tone of our home landline, as if he hadn't typed out my number yet. I called out his name a few times through my cell, but there was nothing. I tried calling back immediately, but there was no answer. He did as he was instructed, called Dad as soon as he got home, and must have sprinted out of the door to go play in the woods. I thought nothing of it until I got home. I picked up my wife from the store on the way back to the house. The porch lights were on, which was our family's way of indirectly saying someone's home. Upon entering our house, I called out to Wesley to see if he was in his room. I got no response, so I assumed he was still outside in the woods, even 5 hours after his call. My kid always loved that fort that I built him. Kim began making dinner, and I changed my clothes and went to the spot in the woods where my son and I had constructed his home away from home. It was starting to get dark, so it was a bit difficult to see through the woods. I spotted the light from his treehouse lamp through his window, and, as any dad should, began silently creeping up the short ladder nailed to the tree to scare the crap out of him. When I reached the top, I quickly swung the curtain door open and let out a roar in an attempt to scare my poor, unexpecting son. However, after scanning the small room, Wesley wasn't sitting in his beanbag chair he normally was. In fact, the chair and his entire collection of rocks, bugs, comics, and games were completely gone off the wooden shelves. The only things in the room were the lit citronella camping lamp that we had given to him when we built the treehouse. and a single Skechers sneaker lying in the middle of the room. The shoe was facing the doorway. I walked over to pick it up and examined it in the light of the treehouse lamp. Nothing was unusual about it, but it was Wesley's. I peeked out of the window, wondering where my son could have run off to, with only one shoe. The darkness had started to creep over the entire forest, and it would be very dark in no time. I called out into the twilight several times, each with no response. He was probably hiding nearby to scare me, and truth be told, it was working. I was terrified already. I left the lamp on and descended the ladder of the treehouse, continuing to scan the dim area for my son. I called and searched for 30 minutes in the dark, getting no response. I was beginning to panic. Sprinting back in the direction of our home, I noticed that the light in his room was on. A wave of calm and relaxation washed over me. He must have snuck home while I was out here searching for him, little bugger. I opened the back door and entered the kitchen, immediately greeted by my wife, asking about the shoe in my hand and where her little Wesley was. I explained what had happened, and she told me he hadn't come home. Once again, the panic in me resurfaced. I sprinted down the hallway to his room and flung open the door. The light to the room was off now, and the interior was completely bare. I know that I saw his light on when I was returning home from the woods. I flipped the light switch on the wall with my right hand, still clutching his sneaker with my left hand. The room was completely empty. His bed, dresser, posters, rug, and bookshelf were completely gone. My wife heard my scream and came instantly rushing to my side. Then she too screamed. We didn't scream at anything we saw, but by the complete lack of something that was before us. Wesley and his possessions were nowhere to be seen, aside from the shoe that I clutched to my chest. Examining it once more in the bare light of his room, a single word had appeared on the sole of his shoe, but only when viewing it in his room. The word didn't appear anywhere else in the house, only his room. The word "don't" was clearly visible in big black block letters on its bottom. Kim immediately called the police and reported a theft, kidnapping, missing child, breaking and entering, everything. I had already grabbed a flashlight and was combing the woods, looking for any signs of my missing child. The police arrived and I told them everything that had happened. The police helped us search the woods and the surrounding area for hours. We searched for days, then weeks, months even. Wesley never returned to our house. Once a week, I would visit his hideout in the woods, which was now overgrown from the months spent untouched, and I left food and water in the hopes that he was hiding somewhere nearby. But the food just sat on the floor, rotting and filling with bugs. The time blended together, and we began to gradually lose hope of ever seeing our boy again. An entire year passed, and I continued to make weekly trips to the hideout just in case he would someday return. August 23rd, Wesley's disappearance anniversary, landed on a Saturday in 2014. I reclined in silent mourning on my loveseat while I recalled the events of exactly 1 year ago. As I sat on the couch, my cell phone rang. The caller ID was our home landline, but I looked over to see our clunky phone set in its home on the dock. No one was using it. The time on the clock next to it read 12:33. I frantically answered the phone, hoping to hear something, anything. But it was just a dial tone. Just like 1 year ago today. Today, I had brought Wesley's favorite snack, Cheetos, and an Arnold Palmer sweet tea to bring to his hideout. But I forgot them on the counter as I sprinted out of the house. It didn't matter. I climbed the ladder of the fort and flung the curtain open. It had smelled horrid because of the rotten bread that I had left the last week. But I would take last week's meal back to the house whenever I left, half expecting to see the bare room as I had every single week following his disappearance. The long burnt-out citronella lamp flared on with my entrance, revealing the object sitting in front of me. Wesley's other shoe, once again facing the door. In stunned astonishment, I scooped up the shoe, examining it for another word. Once again recalling 1 year ago, I sprinted as fast as I could back to the house. The light of his room was mysteriously on. I dashed past Kim in the kitchen and beelined straight to Wesley's room. I paused for a moment outside the door, noticing that no light was visible under it, the same as it was 1 year ago. I opened the door as Kim ran down the hall and followed me. She realized what I had discovered, and together we shared the same mixture of anguish and hope as I flipped the light switch on. The empty sole of the shoe now displayed another single word: bother. We looked at each other in silence as tears streamed down our faces. I placed the shoe next to its partner in the center of the room, reading the phrase, "Don't bother." Each year since, my wife and I have found another piece of Wesley's clothing in the treehouse. The clues only appeared on August 23rd, after I received the phantom phone call from our house landline at exactly 12:33. When I received the call in 2015, I had requested the day off from work. I waited with phone in hand at the bottom of the ladder of the treehouse. As soon as my expected call rang, answered, and repeated the dial tone, I flung myself up the ladder into the treehouse. Same scene as before. Curtain open, light on, and object in the middle of the floor. This time, Wesley's pants lay on the floor, feet facing the door. Grabbing them and sprinting to his room felt all too familiar. I flipped the light on once again and read the next word on them, printed this time on the back of the jeans. This year, the word was looking. August 23rd, 2016. It became tradition for me on these days to miss all other obligations. I wanted to figure out this mystery of my son. The time was 12:32, and I sat cross-legged in the empty hideout, waiting as the seconds ticked by until the inevitable phone call. To my surprise, my phone clock ticked to 12:33, and I received no call. I waited another minute, then 5, then 10. Giving up, I descended the ladder. Once my feet touched the ground, my phone instantly rang. Home landline. Repeat last year. The curtain, lamp, and object. This year was Wesley's shirt. The same striped, long-sleeved t-shirt I had last seen him in. In his bedroom, I read the next word, printed across the back of it. 4. I already dreaded what the next year would bring. I knew that the next word was going to be him. Some sadistic asshole had kidnapped my son and stole all of his possessions. And now they were toying with me, throwing in my face the fact that I completely failed as a father. August 23rd, 2017. I waited outside the hideout for the call once again. I stood on the tiny deck in front of the curtain until I received the call, but it never came. It seemed that nothing would happen until I was completely on the ground, away from the treehouse. I climbed down the ladder, received the call, and returned to the fort. This time it was Wesley's underwear. This was a bit messed up if you ask me. However, each article of clothing I had received from the fort was completely clean, as if it were washed that day. The underwear was no exception. Returning to his room, my hunch upon the next word was completely proved wrong. The word was me. not him. Placing the underwear next to the rest of the clothing, I read the words in order. Don't bother looking for me. Now it's 2018 and my son's disappearance anniversary, if you can call it that, was 3 days ago. Nothing showed up in the treehouse. No phone calls. No clothing, I checked. Nothing new was added to this puzzle of disappearance. I checked his room last night to see the 5 pieces of clothing in the room as I did quite often. But they were missing. On the 6th anniversary of his disappearance, all articles of his clothing disappeared. No one could have taken them. I had boarded up the window to Wesley's room and locked the door 3 times over. Those articles of clothing were the last mementos that my wife and I had of our little boy. And now they have gone missing, too.